Okay, I think we've got a solid group here to get started. So we're gonna dive in. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you for being here today. Welcome to Clean Energy Trust's first webinar of the year. Today, we'll be taking a look at how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the energy transition and how industry experts are leveraging research and data to map out a promising path forward. My name is Susie Spigelman, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Before I introduce you to today's speakers, I just want to take a quick moment to thank you all again for being here and for being a part of Clean Energy Trust's fantastic ecosystem. For those of you who are new to us, we're so glad you're here. Through our work, we invest in and support emerging clean technology startups from across the Midwest region of the United States. Our goal is to elevate these startups in order to make positive environmental and economic impacts. To date, we've made seed investments in 35 startups, including companies like 75F, Igor, Go Electric, and Newmat Technologies. We host events like today's to keep our ecosystem connected with our community and informed of the latest information coming out of the industry. If you'd like to learn more about our work and get involved, please visit our website or shoot me a note here in Zoom. Today, we'll be featuring two energy experts, Caroline Narich and John Lux. Caroline is a managing director from Accenture's utility practice. She'll provide a perspective on how markets and companies around the world are leveraging the pandemic recovery to accelerate the clean energy transition. And John is the president and co-founder of Agentis. He'll provide a deep dive perspective on the demand side. Leveraging data from millions of commercial customers, John will discuss electricity demand, how electricity demand has changed amidst the pandemic, and what it might mean for the future. Today's webinar will start off with presentations from both Caroline and John, and then we'll follow that up with a roundtable discussion. Toward the end of our time together, we'll close things out with some audience Q&A. So at any point, if you have some questions, please type them into the Q&A feature in your Zoom bar, and we'll make sure that we get to them at the end. So at this point, I'm going to hand things over to our two experts, beginning with Caroline. So Caroline, if you want to pop on your video and your audio, the floor is all yours, and let me know when you're ready for me to share your slides.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Susie, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to join this discussion today. If you want to pull up the slides, it'd be great. As Susie mentioned, I'm going to share a broad perspective on the impact of the pandemic on the energy transition, and more specifically, how we should be thinking about recovery as a means to accelerate the transition. In particular, I'm going to share the output of some work that we were recently involved in, led by the World Economic Forum, on using a system value approach to accelerating the energy transition. First, though, I wanted to start with some numbers and the state of play today. So Susie, if you could just jump to the first slide, please. Thank you. So the 2020 figures are now in, and while many of these data points won't necessarily be surprising, together I think they tell an interesting story about how the pandemic has impacted clean energy. So on one hand, total electricity demand fell 4% in 2020, with the C&I segment really driving this reduction, and residential actually increasing slightly as businesses shut down for significant periods of time, and anyone that could, all of us probably included, shifted to home working. In part driven by this reduction in electricity demand, but also by the oil shock, total energy-related CO2 emissions dropped by 11.1% in the year. From a global climate perspective, this is evidently pretty impactful. At the same time, though, the clean energy sector has been hit hard by job losses, particularly in the distributed energy and energy efficiency sectors, with more than 500,000 jobs lost by July 2020. Since then, we've seen some recovery, but not quite to where we were pre-pandemic. Having said that, while many predicted the pandemic would result in significant renewable energy project delays and a reduction in the number of energy efficiency projects and solar PV installations, the sector, fueled by the threat of the ITC and the PTC expiring, and by new policy, for example, in California, mandating that all new homes have solar installed as of 2020, the sector actually fared pretty well, better than I think most of us expected, and demonstrated its resilience. We saw more than 35 gigawatts of new solar and wind capacity come online as coal production declined, and a 7% increase in residential solar installations. And at the same time, we saw increased consumer and investor activism and more utilities announcing carbon reduction targets. 2 points to kind of call out here. One is that while we often assume consumer activism is delineated along political lines, A recent Pew survey actually found that 2/3 of consumers, regardless of political affiliation, now believe climate change is posing a real threat and are increasingly demanding action be taken. This pressure has driven continued action from utilities, even in a year as turbulent as this past one. And there are now 38 utilities in the US that have net zero or carbon-free goals, which I think is pretty impressive. So while a lot of these data points, the reduction in demand, the reduction in emissions, the job losses are a result of the pandemic, I think a number of these data points are actually in spite of the pandemic, and to me really reinforce the fact that the industry is in transition. The question then that I think we really need to ask ourselves is not so much how has the pandemic impacted the transition, but how can we ensure that recovery is as green as possible and really accelerates the transition? Going back to the data, EIA forecasts now expect electricity demand and emissions to come back in 2021 and 2022. And while renewables are forecast to grow, coal is also expected to rebound, driven by higher natural gas prices. So this is by no means a slam dunk, and it really requires concerted policy, industry, and consumer action. Susie, if you want to jump to the next slide. So this question, how can we ensure that the recovery is as green as possible and really accelerates the transition, was a question that the World Economic Forum was really keen to answer. And in collaboration with Accenture, the World Economic Forum's Electricity Industry Action Group, which is a collection of more than 20 utilities across the globe, you can see many of their logos on this slide here, came together to really explore that question, and more specifically to define and establish a system value framework that assesses solutions against more than just cost, incorporating environmental, social, and technical outcomes, and then to test this framework against 5 key markets, the US included, to identify a series of recovery solutions by market, which would actually maximize that system value. This was an incredibly collaborative effort, as you can see. It began in April of last year, and the findings were actually published in October. There's now kind of ongoing work to continue to socialize the framework and to explore different ways it can be used to drive value in the transition. Susie, if you want to jump to the next slide. So what does this framework look like? Well, it's up here on the screen. The system value framework really, as I said, more holistically evaluates the economic, environmental, social, and technical outcomes of potential energy solutions across markets. And it really aims to shift the political and commercial focus beyond cost to include broader value. At its core are a set of 12 quantitative and qualitative outcomes, ranging from GHG emissions to air quality, to jobs, to energy productivity, and systemic efficiency. And the framework's really not meant to be prescriptive at all. It can and it really should be tailored to different markets, as there are obviously certain outcomes that are more or less important depending on the market context. So for no market did we look to optimize against each outcome, but we selected the most important ones. For the US, the team selected 7 priority outcomes to optimize against. So GHG emissions are the ones that are highlighted in the dark blue. GHG emissions, jobs and economic impact, air quality and health, energy productivity and systemic efficiency, resiliency and security, system upgrades, and then cost and investment competitiveness. And again, this wasn't perfect. The US is big, and the priority outcomes actually vary by region. So for example, if flexibility is probably one of the levers that we would select as a priority if we were looking at California. But looking broadly at the nation, these were the 7 that really came to the top in terms of priority. And if you jump to the next slide. So the team then used this framework to explore recovery solutions that would do 3 things. So 1, accelerate the energy transition, 2, support economic recovery, and 3, maximize for the priority outcomes selected within a 5-year period, so by 2025. And if we jump to the next slide, these are the kind of the 4 solutions that jumped to the top of that analysis. So they were really driven by an assessment of the existing clean energy bills that had been drafted or proposals on the table, which would really meaningfully drive improvements over the next 5 years. The first one, Renewables Expansion, was based on a multi-year extension of the ITC and the PTC to increase solar and wind capacity by 25% and 14% respectively, and to put forward a new ITC to support the offshore wind industry. Given the bill that was passed in December, this is one of the solutions we expect to really gain traction and significantly contribute to both emissions reduction, job creation, and generate human health benefits. The second one, transmission investment, has been time and again heralded as being so critical to the development of the US's clean energy economy. And this one really basically assumes that all the major proposed new transmission lines are built to basically get wind out of the central parts of the US to the zones of consumption. Again, the value in terms of carbon emissions reduction is fairly significant, as you can see from the slide here. Investment in efficiency is particularly important in the context of post-COVID recovery, to put workers back to work and to implement smart efficiency measures to lower energy demand. The 2009 Recovery Act proved out its investments, and the thinking here is that we can do the same more than a decade later. The final one, electrification and demand optimization, goes beyond just electricity and really starts looking at greening other sectors such as transport and heating, which are only going to become more important as we shift attention to the larger energy system in a net zero future. Adding new demand provides the exciting prospect of increased optimization solutions using digital technology and flexible load. And if we jump to the next slide, so we did this analysis in April, or we started the analysis in April, and obviously it was published in October, and through this period, more and more information came out around the elections and the various plans. And so we did a piece of work just quickly afterwards to stack these solutions against the clean energy goals that President-elect Biden put forward during the elections. And if we map them against that, we see them contributing about 20% of the stated 2035 target in the next 5 years, which leaves 10 years for the remaining 80%. And given the analysis here was really specific to the electricity sector, that seemed kind of quite reasonable to us. I think if we think going forward, more aggressive policy would obviously help us to get there faster. But in terms of priority, these are the solutions that over the next 5 years that really kind of came to the top for the nation at large. If you jump to the next slide, Susie. I think the important thing here is that these actions are a continuum. So one thing that was really interesting about the analysis done across the 5 markets was that while solutions varied by market because of the priority outcomes and because where they were at their starting point on the path, there was actually consistency on the importance of the levers depending on where each market was. And what we see is that markets are really moving from addressing some of these core elements of the electricity sector transformation, renewables expansion, for example, through to these pivot points where variable generation hits 20 to 30% and more transformational elements such as power market reform, greater demand optimization, greater flexibility are required to really enable acceleration to a net zero integrated energy system, which is when we really have to think kind of beyond electrification, to my earlier point. The United States, at large is really in the core, but as I mentioned, it's a big place. And so there are certain markets like CAISO, ERCOT, and SPP that are actually the pivot point. And so a broader range of solutions and levers will really be required for those markets to continue down the transition path. I think this pathway is a really helpful complement to the framework to thinking about what is important at the various stages of the transition, but also to being able to look ahead and potentially learn from markets that are further along in their transition. And hopefully as we begin to recover from the pandemic, to actually give us some guidelines to consider. So Susie, that is all from me. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Caroline. We're going to be asking Caroline a lot more questions later. She presented a lot of really interesting information. I think we're going to want to dig in. I'm sure folks have plenty of questions that they want to ask as well. So do be sure to ask your questions in Q&A. You can find that at the bottom bar in Zoom. So now we're going to turn things over to John Lux from Agentis. So John, let me know when you're ready to go, and I'll get your screen going.
Awesome. Thanks, Susie. Yeah, you can feel free to pull that up. Hi, everybody. My name is John Lux, one of the co-founders here at Agentis. Caroline, fascinating presentation. Thank you for sharing that with us all. And Susie, wanted to thank you for inviting us to present here today. We are actually, Agentis is one of the inaugural companies in the Clean Energy Trust competition 10 years ago. So it's fun to be back today, and we always appreciate the work that you guys do and your support. So today what I'm going to do is take a little bit more of a micro view into energy data around commercial customers. And Susie, feel free to jump to that next slide. We at Agentis are candidly a bunch of energy and data nerds. So we naturally have packed way too much information into the next 10 minutes, but we're going to do our best and hopefully show some very interesting insights that we've been able to glean from energy data. So really 3 topics that we look to cover here today. Who is Agentis as a company? What is the analysis that we did, and what were some of our key findings? And then naturally, why do we do this sort of analysis and how were we able to use it? So Agentis as a company was started in 2009. We're a growth stage technology company headquartered downtown Chicago. We work with investor-owned utilities primarily around the United States. And we focus on customer engagement with business accounts. And really kind of three differentiators at Agentis. First off, we think to properly engage business accounts, you need to tailor the experience to the size and type of business customer. You can't treat all business customers the same. Number two is we utilize the data to provide these businesses with insights, not just charts and graphs. And years of voice of customer research have taught us that business accounts expect more from their utility than just data and charts and graphs. They want to know the insights coming out of that data. And then kind of third product philosophy or differentiator is we really believe the best way to drive engagement and for these utilities to elevate the relationship with their business accounts is for us to enable their team members to utilize the insights and utilize the technology to elevate that conversation with business customers. So we ingest data for now in excess of 3 million business customers around the United States. And we provide a white labeled solution for the utility to the business customers to better manage their energy. Susie, we can jump to that next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we got to the idea of running this analysis in the first place. We were naturally seeing all the headlines around COVID shutdown and energy use. And a lot of these headlines pertain to the market at whole. And we have in excess of 100 billion points of energy interval data coming out of smart meters or AMR meters. And we asked ourselves two questions. Which businesses are being impacted by COVID and the shutdown associated with that? And how has platform behavior changed due to decreased or increased energy use? So those are the two topics we're going to dig into today. Susie, we can jump to the next slide. I want to start by saying this research and analysis was done by people that are far smarter than myself. We relied heavily on our data science team. We've got a really strong group of data scientists that's growing at Agentis. And these folks do academic research. We do some evaluation type work where we look at users of our technology to see, are they using more or less energy compared to their peers? So we do some EM&V light type work. And then our data science team also contributes heavily into using data science to make our product better. And that's really what we're going to talk about here today. Jim Herzog, our senior data scientist, was one of the leads on really digging into the vast volume of energy data. And Michael Giberson also contributed, another data scientist on our team, digging in specifically as it related to the site usage. So Susie, we can jump to that next slide. So what we did was we took data from 3 of our utility partners in various parts of the country. And we pulled data from in excess of 12,500 business locations. We took at least 2 years worth of data, and this is 15 or 30-minute energy data. All the signals were scaled by median energy use for 2018 and 2019, and then into 2020. And we did some segmentation using industry standard codes like a SIC code. So Susie, we can go ahead and jump. And we're going to talk first about weekly time series plots, and then we're going to dig more and more granular as we dig into the kind of micro aspects of this data. Susie, you can go ahead and jump to the next slide. So our hypothesis, and the reason we chose these 4 types, was we had a hypothesis that restaurants and offices energy use would decrease. And we also thought that grocery stores and hospitals might actually increase during the pandemic. So we're going to share a little bit more of what we saw. This is a weekly signal for restaurants dating back to the start of 2018. Obviously, you can see the seasonality And then you can see a very significant dip in restaurants starting in March of this year. The shaded area behind the plot is what's called the interquartile range. And all that is doing is that's measuring the 25th and 75th percentile of distribution. And as you see that interquartile range get wider, as it does during COVID, that means there's larger variance in how these restaurants are reacting. So you can see here the restaurants have a very large range. Susie, we can jump to the next slide. Another interesting theory here is hospitals. So we do see hospitals have far less of a seasonal impact. You do see a dip during COVID. So hospital energy use actually went down, but far less than restaurants. Susie, we can jump to that next slide. And then we started looking at food stores. So what you'll see here is that the food stores also have a dip during COVID, but again, much less than those restaurants. And then Susie, one more jump here so we can look at the office buildings. What you'll see here is the weekly signals for offices shows that offices were pretty heavily impacted due to COVID as well. And we'll go ahead and jump to that next slide, Susie. So what we wanted to do next is we wanted to get a little bit more granular here. And again, I'm not a data scientist, but we had 10 minutes and I figured this would be the best way to present this data. So we looked to get a little more granular and looked at year-over-year comparison plots. Some really interesting findings we're going to show in the next few slides. One more slide there, Susie. So here is where we took the 2018 and 2019 data for the two business types that were most heavily impacted. And what you can see there is the dotted vertical line is actually when COVID was called a national pandemic. You can see that restaurants compared to offices were much more heavily impacted and their energy use dropped in a much more significant fashion. It is interesting to see that offices are quite a bit lower as well when comparing the 2018 and 2019 data to 2020. But you can really see that significant dip there for restaurants. You know, the silver lining here is you do see a significant comeback for both business types in the June, July, and August timeframe. We can jump to that next slide, Susie. In this instance, what we're looking at is this is another view of all restaurants and all offices compared. We can jump one more slide here, Susie. And the thing that we wanted to show here is that our team identified that there appeared to be some reduction in energy use at the beginning of 2020, even prior to COVID. That could be due to the economy. We're not entirely sure, but you can definitely see the downward trend even prior to the national pandemic starting there in mid-March. Jump to the next slide if we could. This was another interesting takeaway. Our team identified the fact that food stores and hospital stores, or food stores, excuse me, and hospitals very, very closely reflected each other during the pandemic. So while we thought that these two business types, our hypothesis was that they might actually use more, you can see when you really zoom in and get more granular, there definitely is a drop, but we were kind of coincidentally surprised by how similar these two business types and their patterns follow one another. We can jump to that next slide. And now we started digging into specifics of offices. So what you'll see here is on the black line, we have all offices. The blue line is business services. And then what you'll see is office locations classified as legal services dropped even more significantly than the average for business services and all offices. We can jump to that next slide, Susie. Another interesting thing that our team kind of dug into and wanted to look at was, and if you take one more click here, Susie, how do eating establishments and drinking establishments or bars compare to one another? And what you'll notice there is on the April through May plot and the COVID mean, you'll see that eating establishments and drinking establishments, bars, mirrored one another almost perfectly. So both of them shut down in a very similar fashion. One more jump if we could, Susie. And then we started looking at the breakdown of hospitals. And one of the things that we noticed here was that General hospitals show a drop in energy use, while specialty hospitals didn't really see that same drop in energy use. And specialty hospitals, maybe things like outpatient dialysis centers, plastic surgery offices, and obviously dialysis centers make sense because those services needed to be continued throughout the pandemic. One more jump if we could here, Susie. Next two plots that we wanted to share with you all, we're going to show some statistics out of people logging into our customer engagement portal. So you can go ahead and click next. So we're going to just showcase two businesses. This is the how the energy use and logins compare in office buildings. And one of the interesting things you'll see there with offices is as the energy use decreases around this May timeframe, May of 2020, you can definitely see an uptick in people logging in and spending time in the energy management portal. So definitely a correlation here. We found this very interesting. Next slide, if you could, Susie. Very similar, if not more pronounced, as it relates to hospitals. So again, as the black line drops, as energy use drops, and people are preparing for or going into the pandemic, you can see a lot of increased usage and time on site from these business customers looking to manage their energy, looking to make changes, looking to make operational efficiencies. Next slide, if you could, Susie. So summary of our findings, we hypothesized that these two business types might actually increase, two might decrease. What we found was all four business types had significant decreases in energy use. Restaurants by far and away were the highest decrease. You can see that their energy use across these three anonymized utilities was down nearly 23% year over year. We did see increased platform use around these COVID time period. The good news there for us as an industry is people are paying attention. They realize that there could definitely be cost savings if they shut down and make operational improvements at their facilities. We actually saw page view increases in April jump 46%. Our electric usage report, which is one of the charts in our site, the page views there jumped 37%, and people coming in to view their demand data increased by 33%. So I want to close with why do we do these analyses and how do we use all this data? Just three kind of cool case studies from three of our utility partners. One utility took this data and decided that it made sense to reach out to small business customers. So we adopted an email out to the active accounts, small business customers that were using our platform. And that utility actually offered them time on the phone with key account managers. So these are small business customers that weren't normally provided these services, got kind of a value added service. We had another utility that reached out to us and asked us to do some further analysis around some of their key multi-account customers. So we did some custom one-off analyses to help a school district that had hundreds of accounts know which school buildings were shutting down effectively and which schools could benefit from operational changes. That was pretty exciting. And then we had a third utility partner look at this data and realize offices are a big untapped opportunity for improved shutdown. And they did a outbound email campaign through our platform that went out to those office buildings, giving them some tips on how to shut down their energy use and improve their energy footprint during COVID. So Susie, that's it for me. Thank you so much, everybody, and we'll turn it back over.
Awesome. Thanks, John. You know, one of the things that really surprised me in your data was when you looked at hospitals and you saw that decrease in energy usage. And I was just so shocked. And then I remembered that, you know, at the time COVID started, they canceled all elective surgeries. You know, they tried to stop people from coming in from their appointments. And then I, you know, oh, that really doesn't make a lot of sense. So when you took a look at the data and your team was analyzing it, what surprised all of you the most?
Yeah, great question, Susie. Yeah, I think it was at first exactly what you said, which was we had this inclination that hospitals must be very busy. Grocery stores are busier than ever because people can't go out to eat. But I think it was initially the decreases in energy use for those two types, and you're absolutely right. Or our consensus internally was the same, that hospitals did in fact cancel a lot of those elective surgeries. People were probably less inclined to go into the hospital in fear of getting COVID. We were very pleasantly surprised to see that as businesses were shutting down or closing their doors, they were coming back into the energy management tools more often. And that was really encouraging just as an industry to see that people took this as an opportunity to go in and monitor and track and make changes to their energy use and make sure that those changes were taking hold. And that's something we did. We're a Chicago-based business. We have our office in ComEd, and we were kind of actively trying to see in the energy management, in the tool that we provide through ComEd, how low could we get our energy use when nobody was in the office. So that was cool. I think the final takeaway for us was just that there's a big opportunity for the office subset of customers to probably do more, because so many of these offices were likely entirely shut down, and we didn't see energy use reflect that. So I think, you know, it makes sense. There's a lot of things that are left on. There's a lot of things on building automation systems that very well kept running in the same format that they were. So we are taking that from a product standpoint as a way to improve messaging, you know, and personalization for offices. So
sure, that seems like a phenomenal takeaway. You know, we all spend so much time talking about buildings efficiency. Clearly, there's a lot more work that we can all be doing. So really interesting. Thank you for sharing. Caroline, I'd love to ask you the same question. You know, when you wrapped up all of your research, you know, what surprised you when you took a look at everything?
Yeah, I think, well, two kind of comments. One is, I think the point that I made earlier around like actually looking at the different markets and actually understanding that there was more similarity in terms of the types of solutions that were important to the market, depending on where they were in the path to kind of net zero. I think that was a really interesting takeaway for all of us. I think the other thing that maybe is not as surprising, hopefully for some, but is definitely exciting, is just that it's been really powerful to see how aligned the industry action group were on the need for a system value framework to really start a more holistic conversation on the energy transition. And I think that the team have also been amazed by how broadly, as a result, the framework is being applied now. So it's being used to support kind of policy advocacy, to inform investment decisions, to inform rate cases. So, you know, I think it's become a much more powerful and versatile tool than we probably initially imagined.
Great. So let's jump back to John really quickly. You know, when you touch on how the pandemic is impacting, you know, a variety of commercial users. When you look forward, to what extent, you know, beyond just the office space piece, which we've already talked about, to what extent do you expect a lot of these changes to persist post-pandemic?
Yeah, Susie, really good question. I think for us, I think you know, where we see hopefully businesses catching on is this concept that energy isn't necessarily a fixed cost. This is something that even from an operational standpoint, something that I can impact. It's something that small changes in a business, whether it's a restaurant or an office or a small manufacturing location, can result in significant reductions in energy. And I just think this whole concept of operational changes and the fact that energy is something that can be controlled is something that we've seen catch on. And I'm hoping, certainly we are hopeful that it's something that people will continue to pay attention to. And from a product standpoint, we're trying to kind of zero in on is those operational improvements to lead to energy reduction.
Great, great. So, continuing our look ahead at what the recovery might look at, Caroline, where do you see when you look at your analysis and you found the 7 different opportunity areas, when you look more closely at them, where do you see the biggest opportunity areas for a recovery to be? Which when you pulled out that chart of the different sectors, which are most interesting to you and do you think are our biggest opportunities?
I mean, I think just kind of bringing it back also to what John was just sharing, I think, obviously the analysis showed us in the next 5 years, those 4 are kind of key for the US. So I think all of those will be important. I think in terms of where there is a huge amount of opportunity, I do think that on the efficiency side and actually on the demand and kind of end use electrification side, there is a huge amount of opportunity kind of in the next 5 years and beyond. And I think what was so interesting about John's presentation as well is just our ability with digital technologies to get those types of insights today. And I think our utilities, our industry is kind of seeing that potential more and more. Customers are more engaged, and their utilities are with the help of John and the likes, actually building those capabilities to better understand their consumption, understand how they can reduce their consumption, and really make a meaningful change in that space, right? So I think that's probably one of the things that's most interesting as we think about kind of the recovery and maybe what the pandemic has done in terms of accelerating kind of adoption of some of these digital technologies tools, showing the potential, and then really now kind of being at a point where the utilities are building those capabilities to continue that on and build that onto the future. But yeah, I mean, I think all of those areas are important, but I think that's probably where we see greatest potential for upside.
Great. Great. And then if you were to take a step back and look at things on a more global perspective, since this was a worldwide effort, what countries or regions might you look to as examples of places where they've done a really good job tying their recovery effort to the energy transition? Are there any examples that stick out in your mind that the U.S. should be taking notes from?
I mean, I think Europe is probably the obvious example, right? The EU package that was passed in July, Build Back Better, it was 100% focused on a green recovery, and I think it was, I'm gonna get the numbers wrong, but like 550 billion euros or something along those lines, right? Significant amount of capital that is being deployed to support energy, clean energy going forward. And I think one of the things there that's important, which because of the time frame of our analysis being those 5 years that we didn't take into account as much, is really thinking about kind of some of the longer term solutions, right? So I think I saw a question in the chat which was asking about, whether we think the 4 recovery solutions that we identified, whether those were possible today with the technologies that we have today. And I think 100% yes. But I think what we really need to do is look beyond that and make sure that whatever recovery package, right? I mean, the December bill is a step in the right direction, but whatever recovery package beyond that really takes into account some of the longer term energy solutions, hydrogen, increased focus on electrification of transport and other areas that we need a little bit more R&D and a little bit more investment into. And I think that's one of the things, looking at the European package, that they've done very well in terms of focusing on some of those longer term solutions.
Great, great. So then when you start thinking about how to apply some of this analysis to the U.S. market and executing on it, and you're chatting with utility leaders, would you say that they're optimistic about the path forward, about what recovery looks like, and addressing some of the challenges and opportunities that you've laid out?
Yes, on the whole. So I would say that the U.S. is obviously a big country, right? So it's probably kind of state dependent, but I think, and to kind of the earlier point with the data point that I showed, right, 38 utilities who now have a net zero or carbon free target, like that's pretty significant. So I think a lot of them now are realizing how important this is, that they have to be on this decarbonization path. I think the question of how to get there, so target is a first step, but actually what they do to transform their businesses, and these are not small efforts, right? These are significant efforts, but what they actually do and the steps that they take is kind of where we are now, right? There's still a lot of work to do there. but yeah, I mean, on the whole, I mean, I think by nature probably an optimist, but I do think that there's a lot more momentum. And I think the other point that I would make is, the 2009 Recovery Act. I think a lot of utilities have seen this before, right? And they've seen what it can be to put in place a recovery package, which supports some of these clean energy efforts. In 2009, it was focused on smart grids in particular, right? And efficiency in smart grids. So I think with that and with the kind of the policy, climate, global context that we're in now, I think there's a lot more optimism, but I think there's still a lot of work ahead of us too.
Sure. John, same question to you in your conversations with utility leaders. What's your read? What are you sensing from them as they start to think about what the next couple of years look like?
Yeah, no, I think we saw kind of a mixed bag last year. I mean, we had ongoing conversations with certain utility leaders where they were looking to do customer engagement, digital engagement, data analytics, and some of that just got put on hold. There were certain utilities that just kind of shut down and said, look, O&M budgets are tight. We're not going to do anything this year. We're putting a pause on that project. We heard some of that, in the April-May timeframe. Certainly, we also heard trends around concerns last year on how energy efficiency would go in a world where they couldn't visit with business accounts, right? Where they weren't going on site, they weren't going to homes, they weren't. So it seemed that there were concerns around how to hit some of those energy efficiency goals in a COVID world. But silver lining, third trend that we heard was the need to use data and digital engagement down the road, and a realization that customers could be worked with in new ways. So our key account managers can't necessarily visit, but if we are able to utilize this data and some of these insights and put together a packet of information and have a 45-minute consult with that key account, that can still be really powerful and maybe even done more rapidly and more frequently offsite. So positives and negatives both, right? But definitely a focus on data, staying connected with customers, and finding new ways to engage, both from a key account and an energy efficiency standpoint. So
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And account managers are probably we're all learning how to approach conversations that would normally happen in person, and it's good to hear that there's promising avenues to having those conversations, and maybe it'll innovate things for the future. Yeah. So speaking of the future, I have one last question for you, and then we'll turn over to Q&A, and that's for both of you to look into your crystal ball and take a look at the years ahead and make a bold prediction about the state of the world as it pertains to energy in the year 2025. What interesting plays do you see happening then?
Caroline, I'm just going to say whatever you say, so go.
Not one for predictions, but I'm hoping that it will involve a little bit more social interaction and fewer back-to-back Zooms. But I also hope that that some of the lessons learned really that we've learned through this period stay with us as we move forward. I think so. I believe that and John kind of shared with us an example of that, right? But the consumer voice, whether we're talking about C&I or residential, is incredibly powerful. And so I guess my prediction or hope for 2025 is that a greater percentage of consumers across segments and across the country, and not just in pockets like California or the Northeast, right, are playing a more active role in the energy transition and are being empowered by the utilities to do so. Because I think, John's example is a great one. And I think that there's, in terms of kind of giving people the insights, right, and the information and the ability to make changes. And I think as the more we build those capabilities, which I do think that utilities are doing, and the more power we put into the consumer's hands, I think, together it will really require both kind of demand and supply to move forward. So that's my prediction / hope, probably more, for 2025.
Sounds good. John, what say you?
Yeah, I'll say faster adoption of EVs, and that's maybe just a personal passion. Utilities playing a greater role in DERs moving forward and looking for new ways to drive revenue with customers. Utilities mining data to find ways and insights to drive those customer engagements. I mean, that's something that really second half of last year we saw a big increased interest in is utilizing data and personalization to know how and why to engage customers, and that's something we're super excited about. The last thing I'll say, and just kind of closing, is it was really cool to see, you know, small businesses in particular were hugely affected by the pandemic, and how many of our utility partners reached out to our team and just kind of said, guys, how can we help our small businesses? This is important to us. These are important customers, but we also just want to do the right thing and help these people optimize so that they can stay in business. And we had a lot of that. And that was just, it was cool to see these utilities are taking an active role in helping with some of the recovery of these small business customers. And that was just, it was great to see. So.
Great. Okay, well, thank you both for all of your insights. But wait, there's more. We have a bunch of questions that came through. So I'm going to kick us off with some of the questions that our attendees have asked, starting with Caroline. What is your perspective on whether we have the technologies we need to hit climate targets, or whether there remains a steep innovation imperative to develop and commercialize new technologies?
So I think, you know, kind of going back to the point that I made in terms of our analysis was really focused on that 5-year period. So as I said, I think we have the technologies to meet those targets. I think if we look beyond, and if we look to kind of the 2035 goal, I think there is more work that is needed, especially when we think about getting towards an integrated energy system, right? So looking beyond, our analysis was focused on the power sector, but looking beyond the power sector and really thinking about kind of the energy, the broader economy, and how we decarbonize hard to decarbonize sectors, right? Heavy, high heat, high processing chemical plants, things like that, that becomes harder, right? So I think that there's more work that's needed there. I think there's more work that's needed on long duration battery as well, right? Battery storage. So hydrogen is obviously a big area of focus across the world now. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think that there's, in the short term, I think we have a lot of the technologies needed to make significant progress. Longer term, to get to net zero, I think we need more focus on R&D.
Great. Okay, this next question is for John. What are some potential demand reduction strategies from COVID that should be carried over? You know, were there any strategies that the folks, the data you looked at, you know, they started doing during this time that we should be considering and planning on using moving forward?
Yeah, I think you know, an area that we're really driving towards is, you know, we saw this increased site usage around the times of potential for operational savings, right? And we've seen other spikes in energy, or we've seen other spikes in site adoption historically around things like holiday weekends, end of year shutdown, hot periods in the summertime, hot days. So what's something that we're going to be working actively on in the next 6 months is more with outbound alerting, and especially around these periods of operational efficiencies, because there's undoubtedly a desire from business owners to want to do that. They need nudges, they need reminders at scale. So that's a big area that our team is focused on, is identifying these high areas of site use, whether it's a hot day or a long weekend, and making sure we're getting the appropriate alerts out to customers to remind them how much they could potentially save if they shut down effectively. So.
Great. And I'm not sure how deep into policy and advocacy Agentis goes, but one of the questions we received on a similar line was, what policies would you like to see based on the data regarding demand side measures further drive down energy use?
Yeah, I mean, Susie, we don't play a ton in policy, but availability of data, like at this point in time, our hope would be that all utilities agree getting this data out to their business customers, providing them with insights is key. Yeah, so I would start there. Smart customers can benefit a great deal from AMI data. The quicker you get that data to customers, the better. And we've seen people who have access to this data set up multiple users at a business location and log back in daily. I mean, there's a lot of value here to businesses in terms of energy data accessibility, and not just the data, but knowing what they can do with that and how it could impact their bottom line. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jumping back to Caroline, have you looked into the nuclear sector and decommissioning as part of the energy strategy or energy transition? I'm sorry.
So the work that we did, because it was in the 5-year time frame, nuclear was sort of out of scope, just given the 5 years, right? I think if you were, and one of the things that we've been doing with the framework, as I said, we continuously are looking at different ways of using it with a lot of our clients. And for California, for example, we have taken a broader view to actually apply the framework to look across electricity and gas. So again, not nuclear, right? But I think if you were applying it to a different part of the country and you were taking a longer perspective, you could definitely use it to assess the nuclear options as part of that as well. So
okay, and this next question is on transmission lines. When do you project the transmission lines between the Midwest and other markets will be built, particularly moving Midwest wind generated electricity to other regions' distribution grids?
Again, not one for predictions. I think this is a very politically charged area, but I mean, I think what came out of our analysis, right, is obviously the importance of that and the importance of transmission. The way that we did it in terms of the 5-year period, we assumed existing transmission lines would be built. We didn't assume by when, but we sort of like banked the carbon savings as a result, right?
Sure.
I think I'm not gonna put a date in terms of what I actually think will happen there, but I think it's an important part for the U.S. to actually achieve its carbon reduction goals to include transmission as part of that. I think it's going to be an important part of the solution for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Talking a little bit more about the analysis that you've done, some folks want to know if there is any sort of report that they can take a look at from your slides.
Yeah, so I will, I don't know, Susie, if I do it through you, but I will send a link. All of the analysis that we've done actually across the markets is public. So we looked at the US, Brazil, China, Europe, and I'm forgetting one. But you can download all of the specific market analysis as well as the overall framework. So I'll send out the link to that.
Great, yeah, if you want to send me that link, I'll make sure it gets distributed to the list. So then jumping back to John again, have there been other past events that have spurred customers to increase the usage of their energy portal, or was this the first incident that you've seen where they've said, we really need to understand what's going on?
Yeah, I hit that one a little bit accidentally, I guess, in the last question, reading through some of these, but definitely like the holidays, the end of the year, the hot weather periods, those sort of periods definitely drive site usage as well. So.
Okay. And your data seems to show restaurants as returning rapidly to more traditional energy use levels. And this question's the asker's sense is that the restaurants have been damaged as an industry overall, and many have closed permanently. Do you have any thoughts on how some of those closures that we've seen and just the overall negative impacts that we've seen might contrast with the data that you've seen?
Yeah, Gary, good question. The analysis that we did required that the customers have 2 years of historical data, and then we're still providing data at the point in time when we did the analysis in August or September, I think it was. So we didn't take into account the businesses that had closed. So if we still get data, the business is still open. I hope there's another question after this because I don't want to leave it on a sour note, but definitely have seen an increase in business closures, obviously, as would be expected throughout COVID. We definitely see that trend. It's part of reality. But you're right. The restaurants who have managed through, certainly do seem to have been coming back to normal in that August, September timeframe, where our analysis ended. Definitely an uptick in getting back towards normal. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, Susie, can I ask a question here just to John, based on one of the earlier points? I'd just be interested in your perspective, John. You mentioned, obviously, so there's the whole piece around kind of the customer engagement, then obviously getting more engaged by, logging to the portal, all of those pieces. But also the utilities that you've been working with, really wanting to play a more active role. And I wondered just how you saw that evolving, especially as we think about the energy transition, right? And we think about kind of hopefully an evolution to the regulatory structure in many markets as well, really putting the spotlight on utilities to play a more central role, both in terms of the customer engagement, but also in just kind of driving the energy transition forward.
Yeah, it's a good question, Caroline. We were fortunate in that we had, and I'm not gonna be too salesy here, but we had finished a big product advancement around the end of last year called Report Builder. And what that allows folks to do on the utility staff is take any of the visualizations and data insights in our customer platform and turn that into reports, like a PDF report that can get delivered to a customer either via email or printed out. You can also add photos that you've taken if you've been on site. You can put who it was prepared by, who it was prepared for, put some recommendations, put some open source text. We saw a big increase in requests for trainings around that product and that piece, so that folks could continue to engage with some of these customers, remotely. So that was definitely a trend, and just kind of a fortunate instance that that product had been launched when it was. So good question though. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll end on a positive note here with this next question. We'll just do a rapid fire, another prediction question from our audience. If you were to predict what other industries or sectors would lead innovation on energy consumption, what sectors would you keep your eyes on? So let's start off with Caroline.
I don't know why I always start, but I'm going to.
You're top of my screen, so I keep going to you first.
Good. Glad it's no other reason. So John's going to have to come up with a better answer. I would say technology for sure. So, I mean, I think that if we look at some of the big technology players, the small technology players that are emerging, I think that there is increased amount of interest and focus on the energy sector and what can be done. And there's so much potential. So I see more and more convergence between our industries, and I think that's only going to increase.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I was going to say technology, data centers, and also sophisticated retail. I think when you talk about we even look at like grocery stores where margins are very tight, but some of these national chains have pretty sophisticated energy management teams. I think there's places like that are seeing a lot of adoption of these sorts of tools and energy management as well. So
great.
Basically, well, it's an exciting time for the industry, Susie. So I think
it is an exciting time. 2021 is and ahead. There's going to be a lot of changes coming up, across the board, and I think we're all eager to see how things shake out. So we'll take this moment to pause here. John Lux, Caroline Narich, thank you both so much for your expertise today. It was great hearing your insights and all of the tremendous analysis that you and your teams have been doing. It's information like this that helps a lot of us, really put our be able to wrap our heads around what this industry looks like now and what it's going to look like going forward. So thank you so much for being here and sharing with us today. Thank you everybody online who joined us. We are recording this, and so it will be available to you and your colleagues after. We'll make sure it's posted up to CET's YouTube channel. And then we will also make sure that we send out Caroline's data. And John, if there's anything that you'd like to share as well, we'll include that too. So once again, thank you all for being here, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Susie.
Thanks
for
so
this.
much for having us. Thanks. Bye.